joined once again by our very special contributor to Wall Street Week. He is Larry Summers of Harvard. So, Larry, welcome back. Great to have you. Let's start with those U.S. GDP numbers that came in. Showed we were back into growth, modest growth. What did you see in those numbers that would indicate where we are headed?
I think it's hard to know. It confirmed what I think we knew, that despite two negative quarters, the economy was not in any real sense in recession at this point. But if you look through the numbers to private domestic demand, which is probably the best indicator of economic strength, it really wasn't very strong, well below 1% for the third quarter. And so I think what we've now had for 9 months is essentially no GDP growth and inflation on core measures probably stronger than it was at the beginning of the 9 months, suggesting that we've got real challenges ahead. There continue to be arguments that inflation rates are going to come down, but we haven't yet seen them come down. So I don't think the fundamental picture that a soft landing remains an enormous and unlikely challenge is very different than it was before we got these numbers.
We're getting some political blowback now. Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio, wrote a letter to Jay Powell, followed by Mr. Hickenlooper, senator from Colorado, saying we shouldn't give up these gains we've had in employment and progress we've made in the name of fighting inflation. Are we going to see more and more of that political pressure, do you think?
I think there are 2 points. The first is that the political pressure is a counterproductive strategy from the point of view of those who launch it. Frankly, the Fed doesn't listen, and if anything, feels more pressure to prove its independence. So they don't influence short-term rates and what the Fed actually does, but they do raise questions in the mind of market participants, and they raise long-term rates. So political pressure is a fool's game and actually probably makes financial conditions tighter than they otherwise would be. And that's entirely apart from the merits of the argument being made. I yield to no one in how much I loathe unemployment and want unemployment to be as low as it possibly can be over time. The concern is that, as in the 1970s, if we don't contain inflation, we set the stage for much more financial instability and unemployment. And that is the argument that has to be made by those who are on the dovish side. They say that the Fed is going to be counterproductive and overdo it. A corollary of that view is that they should think either that the Fed should abandon its 2% target or that they're going to push inflation below 2%. And I think it would be helpful if every critic of the Fed were asked exactly that question. Are they really saying that 2% inflation should not be the goal, in which case they should describe what their attitude is towards inflation and how they expect it to work out over time? Or are they expressing the view that the Fed is acting so strongly that it's going to produce so large a recession that inflation is going to fall below 2%?
Larry, let's take a bit of a longer view, as you did this week in some of your tweets, actually. We had a study out showing how much we lost in our children's education because of the pandemic, something like 6 months, and you translated that actually into what that really means for the economy. Tell us about that problem.
Look, we talk on this show about financial capital, and it's very important, but human capital is even more important. And what a generation of economic research has now shown is that human capital is the most important determinant of our economy's long-term growth and most important determinant of the fairness and equity with which incomes are distributed in our society. And so when we see 6 months or a year's loss in children's achievement, that's a 5 to 10% decline in the value of human capital for tens of millions of children. And if you add up what that value is in terms of the lost earnings down the road, it's comfortably into the trillions of dollars and not just a few trillion. So we've gotten some really very discouraging news, and it points up the importance of our doing much more and much better on what we're doing in the whole education system. We can't fix what happened. We can't fix the non-learning that took place when kids were at home during COVID. We can do everything we can to double down on learning going forward. And that's about how our schools are organized. That's about who's staffing and teaching in our schools. That's about making sure they're adequately resourced. And in my view, that's absolutely critically about accountability for everyone. Accountability for those teaching and administering in the system, and also accountability for the kids. Whether it's the fact that close to 50% of all the grades in the Ivy League are A, straight A, not A minus, or whether it's social promotion in too many of our schools, or whether it's the move away from testing because we don't like the messages that tests send relative to our social aspiration. We have got to get more serious about actual knowledge acquisition in our education system at every level.
Larry, we started the week with President Xi coming out and unveiling his senior management team, if I can put it that way, which surprised some people because there were no perceived as moderates at all. They were really people who are very much aligned with him. He also had a fairly aggressive speech on his economic policy in China. What did you make of where China is headed? Certainly the markets didn't like it very much.
I think anybody who thought that the posture of Chinese policy was politicized before the Party Congress, but would be reformist after the Party Congress, got absolutely nothing to make their views confirmed. They didn't get it with respect to COVID. They didn't get it with respect to personnel. They didn't get it with respect to rhetoric on the policy substance. So given what happened, I wasn't surprised to see markets respond with disappointment. Now, ultimately, what happens is going to depend not on what was said and just which personnel appointments took place at this Party Congress. Ultimately, it's going to depend on how things in the Chinese economy play out, and it's going to depend on the judgments that President Xi makes. I'm not optimistic for China's economy for reasons we've discussed in either the short run or the long run, but we will have to see. And I think what we can hope for at this point is not any kind of friendship or partnership, but a kind of cold détente in which the U.S. and China recognize that they have to manage their coexistence in their mutual interest, whatever the depths of their hostile feelings or sense of antipathy.
And finally, Larry, let's end up on golf, something that you are very devoted to. I dabble in a little bit. Augusta National. It appears that the Department of Justice is now investigating along with the PGA. I don't know that we know what the merits of the case, but what was your reaction?
I've got no idea what the merits of any of it are, but I have to wonder at a time when the Justice Department, the President are claiming that we've got massive problems of monopoly and concentration in our economy, and when inevitably legal resources are finite, whether protecting millionaire, multimillionaire PGA players from some kind of exploitation is a sensible allocation of resources and a sensible priority. Even on the worst view of what is happening, I see a lot of other abuses in our country that seem a lot more serious. And so I wonder about this choice, and I wonder whether there isn't some headline-seeking element in it.